I think the near-death experience is where science meets religion.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. What an amazing story you have, and a story that you've produced with this content. So, Don, can you kind of join us and talk to us about, coming alongside after death and sharing your experience once again, because this is, you've shared it very publicly, but...
It's been 6 years since I got the original phone call about this project. And so gradually, I got more calls and more involved. And then we shot that footage during COVID, and people were dying left and right. So it just became more urgent as it drifted along, and was completed. And then Angel Studios got involved in it, who have a phenomenal track record of promoting and distributing very quality content. And it happened. I think it was ordained. I think it was anointed. And so I couldn't be more humbled and proud to be involved in a project like this. And it's all because I got run over by a truck and killed. So that's pretty phenomenal. So the story is told again. It won't go away, because I think people want hope. They want to know if there is life after death. They want to know if heaven is really a real place, and they want to know if they can go there. And this film answers all those questions.
Yeah. And what about for you, coming onto this project, and what was your heart to it?
As a producer, I want to tell distinct stories for distinct audiences. It's kind of the way you do it. It's the smart way to do it. And very rarely, I think once in a career, you get an opportunity to touch a project that's for everybody. Mm-hmm. And this just happens to be one of those where grief and loss affect all of us as humans, part of the human condition. And to be able to touch a film that gives tremendous hope. And I think that word is too overused, so maybe it doesn't sit how it needs to sit, but coming off of the last 3 years of the pandemic, in the midst of the moment we're here now globally, I think actually hope maybe makes more sense now than ever before. And I think this film is a vehicle for that. That's the hope.
And Don, we were just talking about, the grief that you endured last year as your daughter passed, and, revisiting your experience through this movie and watching it, how does it kind of make you think about grief?
When Nicole was diagnosed with kidney cancer, and she had one of her kidneys removed immediately, obviously life changed on that day in a remarkable way. She has 2 younger brothers. She has 2 children, a husband of 18 years. And so life suddenly becomes much more urgent and visceral. And of course, she had heard me speak many times. She almost lost Daddy, which is what she called me all of her life. And she might have been 46, but she was my little girl. And so we had many talks about this. And she heard me talk about heaven extensively. And so she got to ask all the questions she wanted to know. We prayed that she would live here. But God chose. When I held her the first time, I knew where she came from. She was a gift from God. And so I think all of us really belong to Him, whether we acknowledge it or not. Some people just never acknowledge it. So He gave her to us, and it was time to give her back to Him. After all, she belonged to Him. And she had pledged her life to Him. I remember I baptized her. So we knew all that, but it was hard to let go. I tell people now who are going through a tremendous loss, I'm sorry for your temporary separation from your mother, your daughter, your uncle. It's real, but it won't last. So we believe Nicole is waiting for us at the gates of heaven, and we're so looking forward to seeing her. And we miss her now, honestly, but we know where she's at.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting watching the movie After Death, because I've dealt with grief. I watched the process of my mom passing, and she was sick for a long time. But, I was telling the other interviews as well, it's like this movie kind of made it more visual, obviously. And it's like understanding what'll happen, like that she passed and she was brought into complete healing and light, and love. And the body, was she was outside the body, and she was, and all of these elements. And so it did give me a sense of hope. So you may, hear more stories of people feeling that from that. And what would you kind of say about,
Well,
in your own words?
Yeah, I mean, your story resonates in the comments on social. There's tens of thousands of comments. And every third or fourth comment is somebody saying, my grandpa, my mom, my brother, I just lost my... So again, it's that very, very human thing to deal with grief and loss. And, we think we hope this film will be kind of a doorway. The doorway is grief into the room of hope. It's like you have to walk through the pain, the sorrow to get to the other side. It's the essence of the hero's journey. If you don't have that obstacle, then the return with the elixir is not as good as it can be. And so it's the way that the whole thing has been designed. And so it's difficult. And yet I think a film like this can provide confidence that there's an afterlife, but then it can also sort of challenge us, how do we live here? All the seemingly mundane and small moments of life really do matter. And our lives ripple into eternity.
And with your experience on it, did you feel like, you must have been changed completely afterwards. How did you live in a new way, or kind of what was the afterwards?
The folks in the film have become friends of mine. I knew a lot of them for many years. But the reality of it is every story is extremely personal. It's very real. And I have yet to meet, and I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of people who have had similar experiences. They're never the same after this, never. So many of them, and I really can't remember anyone that I talked to who didn't, who if they weren't a believer, didn't become one. That's the benchmark, that's the point, that's the fulcrum, that's the turning point of their existence, was that. And in many cases, it was a horrible experience itself. It was excruciatingly painful, enormously difficult for them and their families. I often say when I got hit by the truck, my wife got hit by the truck, my children, my church got hit by, my family got hit by the truck. All of our lives were changed in that instant. People are rushing to the hospital and trying to get information and make phone calls. And then they had to take care of me. Every one of them, I was completely helpless for months, if not years. I couldn't do anything for myself. So they were all impacted, but they've also all changed as a result of this. When I looked out and saw my father in the congregation where I was sharing this story for the first time in my life, and I'd already been preaching for many years, when I saw him sitting out there, I knew everything was different now because he came to hear me speak. He came to hear the story. And in many ways, he knew the story. He's the one in the original movie who says, "Son, I'd give anything to trade places with you," when I was in the hospital. So that was his legacy of this, but also to hear him, to see him come and watch me share this testimony again. Everything was changed after that. And I think it changes you. We just hope people don't have to get run over by a truck or drowned or be in a plane crash or try to take their own lives before they realize how urgent being prepared for what's next is. It's all urgent because we're all just one breath away from what happens next. It can happen that quickly. Be prepared.
So this is an incredible film. I thought it was so interesting, and it's so well done. It was, you did it in a way that it really made you think about it, right? And no part of it was cheesy. It was just, wow, this is incredible. So talk about kind of the process of coming on it and what your heart was by even taking it on.
Yeah, so I've been a filmmaker for about 15 years. Most of my work was in commercial work. This is my first, feature film. But the reason why I started to, venture down this road of making After Death was in 2012, my brother-in-law was tragically killed by a drunk driver. And that kind of caused me to ask questions about, is there something after or not? I wasn't sure what I believed at that time. I really struggled with that. But that's when I came across these stories of people who had clinically died for a period of time, came back, and had these experiences. And it was encouraging and hopeful for me to hear that. But I think there was something really special about, after 30 books, all of these different experiences and how they overlap. So I just thought this would make a perfect film.
Yeah. Has this helped you kind of with the concept of grief and all that process that you went through?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me, yeah, my wife's family. It was my wife's only sibling, so it was really tragic to see that what they went through. They didn't struggle with it as much. I think they had a faith. They were Christians, and they had a faith that was deep. Obviously, mine was very shallow, which is what I came to learn. But through these experiences, vicariously, I was kind of like living through that, and even a plane crash and a car crash, which we include in the film, with Dale Black and Don Piper. I'm kind of like living through that experience of like, is this what my brother-in-law experienced? Is this what he saw and what he experienced? And so for me, yeah, it just offered a lot of hope, and it helped with kind of the grieving process. And for me, it gives me a great sense of hope that I can see him again.
Yeah. I had the same feeling watching this, and I watched my mom pass actually, and she was sick for a long time. And so, it was things that I'd read in the Bible that I know she's experienced, the hope and the light and all that things. But I felt like this movie visually, how you guys had done it, even though, you can't, it's not, you visually put it together so well that you do kind of, it gives you hope. It gives you and even a deeper understanding. It's almost like you're reading the Bible and then you go to Israel and you understand the Bible a little bit better.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yep.
You may get those stories from people who have dealt with grief and felt like, this gives them a deeper level of understanding. So,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then for me too, like in terms of like just reading the Bible, I read the Bible in a completely different way now after all of these experiences. Wow. There's so many accounts in Scripture of these obviously it's full of spiritual elements and things that are really kind of difficult to like grasp and like tangibly understand. Yeah. But I think these near-death experiences kind of help with that.
Yeah. And going through this process and hearing everybody's stories, has your faith deepened, and what were things that kind of surprised you maybe? For sure, yeah. Like, so I would say the biggest surprise is that, out of 14 people that we have in the film who have very different backgrounds, and some of them from, countries all around the world, even culturally that are, very different than what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a Christian home, going to church all my life. Not everyone has that experience. Some people grew up in the Hindu home in India, and or a Muslim home, in Syria, and so there's all these different kind of backgrounds. But when they clinically died and had these experiences, it's pointing to one reality. It's like there's this reality of eternity after, and it's heaven or hell. God does exist, and so we also have 3 atheists in the film. And they were radically transformed by their experience. So it's just like, no, they know that there's something after. And I think that's, it's amazing. And you were telling me that one of the experts that you used, he was studying the Bible and all the different religions. Can you talk more about that and kind of what his, So John Burke, who wrote the book Imagine Heaven, who's in the film, he came to faith through near-death experiences. So he didn't have, a Christian upbringing or he didn't have that understanding of, and faith. And so, but his dad was dying of cancer, and that kind of, in the same way for me with losing my brother-in-law, kind of caused him to ask those questions about does something happen after. And he came across Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which is basically just a bunch of accounts of near-death experiences, a bunch of stories. And he just thought there's got to be something here. There has to be something after. So he actually went through a whole journey of reading basically every text that he can get his hands on all the different world religions. And what he was finding was with near-death experiences, there was like these 40 common depictions of life after death, which includes things like a life review or meeting a God, like a man made of light, which might be Christ. There's all these different descriptions of what people would experience in life after. And he was finding with these different religious texts that there was like, I think he said 5 or 6 common descriptors of what the people are experiencing in the afterlife to what it was shown in these different world religions. But when he came across the Bible, there was 38 out of the 40 common descriptors that were there all throughout Scripture. And for him, he just settled on the Christian faith because he's like, obviously this must be it. This is like
the Bible is just full of this and perfectly aligns with what people are experiencing.
Yeah. But this is definitely a film, I know they always say this on Christian films. They're like, oh, we could take anyone. This, I've watched a lot of films, right? And I usually don't even say that. Like I say, it's a Christian movie if it's a Christian movie. Sure. But this is a movie, I think, for everyone. And everybody should watch it because really everybody's got to come to this point where you're thinking about these things.
Yeah, it's a question that affects everyone, right?
Yeah.
Like, what happens after we die? Everyone has that question, I think, deep down, whether they're asking it out loud or not. For me, after going through loss, I think that makes you, when you come face to face with death, it kind of challenges you to ask those questions out loud, right?
Yeah.
But I think we all ask that question. And so we made this film really for everyone for that very reason, because, death does affect everyone.
Yeah. And how is it, you guys are on Angel Studios. How is it working with Angel and kind of the pairing there?
It's amazing. Like it's incredible to work with the team at Angel Studios. We had a finished film when we brought it to them, and they saw, the vision for the film and saw that this film could have tremendous impact with people. And so they actually, they brought this to the Guild, which is a unique thing with Angel Studios. And it's basically a group of people that vote yes or no on whether this should go to the theater or not, or if it should be made or not. And ours passed, and this becomes Angel Studios' next big release, which we're really excited about.
Love it. Is there anything else you'd want to say that you hope people get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that people think about life a little bit differently. I realize that life is short and it's very fragile because of the loss I'd gone through. Not everyone has that same story, but I hope that people come away with, I guess, a renewed sense of hope and purpose, and that with the time that we have here, what could we do with the impact that we have on many lives around us.
So this is extremely interesting after death, and you've been an expert in this field for years and years. What was the moment that you're like, I really want to study this whole thing?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of accidental. It was at a point, I was an engineer, very skeptical, analytically minded, always like, how do you know, right? And my dad was dying of cancer. And someone gave him the very first research that coined the term near-death experience. When people clinically die, they're resuscitated, and they talk about this life to come they experience, more real than this life. And I picked it up and I read the book in one night, and I said, oh my gosh, could this be actual evidence that this afterlife stuff is real? And so I just got extremely curious. And I've studied over 1,000 near-death experiences over 35 years now. And and ultimately went from a career in engineering to become a pastor, actually to help people understand how the science and faith, how they connect up.
Well, that's interesting because it really led your faith journey, even through the whole process, which, it is in those moments that people do kind of think about, in these hardships that like what's going to happen. And so what would you like to, encourage people going through that kind of thing from being a part of this movie?
I think just have an open mind, I mean, there is incredible evidence. Most people don't realize, but millions of people have had a near-death experience. Gallup poll found like 13 million Americans. More recently, 2019, the European Academy of Neuroscience reported on a study done across 35 countries, finding 5% of the population, when near clinical death or clinically dead, had a near-death experience. And so we're talking about millions of people all over the globe. And what I've been trying to show in my writing is how these commonalities are all painting a similar picture. Not all identical.
Wow.
And that's important too. In a court of law, if you have 10 eyewitnesses who all say everything exactly the same, that's collusion. Yeah. You wouldn't trust it. Yeah. But if you have 10 people who say overlapping things from unique perspectives, that's the most incredible testimony. And that's what we have with near-death experiences.
At this point, people probably come to you, right, and present their situation.
From all over the world.
Wow.
And that's the thing, that's what's been fascinating to me, is that, people from all over the world are experiencing something not necessarily in their cultural upbringing or background, but it's the same.
Wow. So I thought the movie was extremely interesting. I want to know how you got first involved with it and, all that kind of process.
About 7 years ago, Stephen, the producer, contacted me. He had seen me on a Canadian TV show, and he had gotten Imagine Heaven, my first book, and read it. And he said, we need to make a movie out of this. And I was actually in a contract with Netflix at the time. And so I said, well, I can help you, but I can't do anything officially. And so I just connected him to some of the stories in the movie. And then he contacted me during COVID and said, hey, we want to film you as an expert. And I was like, great. And kind of went from there.
Yeah. You mentioned COVID. Do you think that, and ever since COVID, people are even more thinking about this concept and, everything like the hardships going around the world today that we know of, you think people are even more considering what's going to happen in the afterlives?
It's the strangest thing because there's nothing we have more in common as humanity. Sometimes people get all obsessed, like, gosh, is this the end and Armageddon and the end of the world? And I'm always like, you know what? We don't know, but it's going to be your end. I mean, it's certain. 70 years, probably.
Yeah.
And why do we avoid it? I think that's a fascinating topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I think what these near-death experiences are showing is that we don't need to run in fear. Instead, there is hope that truly there is a life to come. In fact, this is more the shadow of that being the real thing. And it's overshadowed by a God who created us all and loves us all. Each person individually, uniquely, doesn't matter where you're from, what nation, and he knows us so personally. He knows our hearts. And all he wants is us to turn to him.
It's amazing because I read these things in the Bible, right? And it's in the movie that these people are experiencing these things, and it's like, but seeing it, it's almost like going to Israel. Like once we see Israel, you kind of get a greater understanding of things that you've read.
Yeah.
But visually, like seeing and people talking about it and the way the movie's orchestrated it, it kind of helps me even understand death more because death is, it's kind of a nebulous thing or whatever, like we can't grasp it, but seeing it and hearing about it. So I appreciate that a lot, actually.
Well, and what we don't know, we often fear, right? And death feels like the ultimate loss.
Yeah.
And there is grief, right, when we lose someone. But to know that it's actually for that person the opportunity to step into life.
Yeah.
And a life that we, it doesn't take much to realize something is wrong here. Something is missing. And that's an important clue. It's a very important clue. There's, C.S. Lewis once said, there's thirst and we find water to satisfy the thirst. There's hunger and we find food to satisfy the hunger. But if there's a desire we crave that nothing on earth can fill, that means we were created for something beyond earth.
Wow.
And we all have those longings, right?
Yeah.
For purpose, for meaning, for love, that somehow we're always struggling to get fully met. But when you hear testimony of people from around the world who experience this life to come in the presence of a God who in God's presence, it's like, this is the relationship I've always longed for.
Yeah,
well, then it makes you think.
What are the changes you've seen in people, after they've had these experiences and stuff?
It's drastic.
It's always,
and there have been studies done on the life change following. In fact, it's fascinating because there have been 900 scholarly articles written on this. Wow. In the Journal of the American Medical Association, The Lancet, Europe's famous medical journal. And one of the things that they've done is study cardiac arrest patients who had a cardiac arrest and didn't have a near-death experience versus those who did, and the life change is drastically different.
Wow.
The people who had a near-death experience, they're less concerned about proving themselves to people and all the things people jones for, for attention and all that. They're much more, one of the consistent themes is that God is love and how we love each other and the little acts of kindness we do, they matter. They have a ripple effect throughout humanity. And these people who come back from near-death experiences, that's what they're more interested in.
Wow.
Consistently.
Yeah. Well, I've dealt with grief. I've seen my mother passing. I don't want to cry, but I think this movie actually gave me, you know, it made me cry happily, you know, knowing all the joy and peace. And we know that because I'm a Christian, but just, you know, it reinstated it, right? And so I love that. You know, what do you hope people kind of feel inspired by this movie? Everybody, you know, no matter if you're Christian or not, you're going to think about death, right? And so.
Well, yeah, and I hope it gets people seeking, just like it got me as a skeptical analytical engineer seeking. Yeah. And I do believe when you seek, you find. And, you know, like I'm trying to show in this new book, Imagine the God of Heaven, people from all over the world, they're experiencing the same God of love who created them, loves them more than they could have possibly imagined. And when they come back and they do seek, they do find. And there's incredible hope there. It removes all fear of what's to come. And not only that, it gives you the hope that no matter what loss there is in this life, that's not the end of the story. This is actually just the first chapter of a much greater story.
Yeah, and the person, you know, in my case, it was my mother, like she's doing better now, she's healthy now, right?
And she'll be the one welcoming you when it's your turn.
Heaven is light, God is light. You realize that you are not a body.
If you enjoy videos that follow your values like ours and you want to help us continue, go to movieguide.org/donate because we're actually a nonprofit. You may not know that, but we're working in Hollywood every day to help families have more choices that follows their values. And also subscribe right now.